Hello and welcome to the 30 Vocals podcast. It's a brand new podcast by yours truly with the aim of gaining an insight into the perspectives of musicians from different disciplines when it comes to singing. Recorded from my room and on Zoom with a guest. So today we have got the one and only Ben Hiley, ACM graduate, very talented mixing engineer, producer, musician and aspiring vocalist, I believe.
Hello everyone.
How are we doing this morning?
Pretty good, thank you. How you doing?
Yeah, not too bad, not too bad. So, you're an aspiring vocalist, right, Ben? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
So that's good for me because I'm a vocalist that wants to learn more about vocal mixing. So I think we can have a nice exchange of ideas today. So,
Oh, good. I've got lots to say about vocal
I'm
producing.
sure you do, man. I'm sure you do. Right, so I thought you could start with talking about an interesting thing that we were going over in the planning the other day, which was how male vocals, the processing and mixing of male vocals is sometimes an art that's maybe overlooked by a lot of engineers.
Yeah. I kind of wanted to go over male vocals specifically because I feel like in production classes and a lot of tutorials online, people, when they think of vocal processing, really focus on the female vocals. Like, it's kind of general practice to cut a lot of the low end out, and well, people just get used to the frequencies. You know, when they're talking about key frequencies for, you know, what to DS, what to cut out, they're generally aimed at female vocals,
especially in like pop production. You hear
exactly,
that a lot. You know, the high
and male vocals should be treated differently because
of course,
and it's not so much of a pitch thing; it's more the format. Like
exactly.
Like I was saying earlier to you, you know, even if a male vocalist is singing high, you should still treat it like a male vocal because the frequency of the S's and stuff.
When you say formant, what exactly do you mean by that to the uninitiated among our listeners?
Right. So it's more like the harmonics. It's more like the I think it comes from like the diameter of the throat.
Yeah.
And it's more to do with, even if you're singing a high tone, you've got the harmonics and the kind of the frequency response of a male vocal.
It's interesting how the mixing processes that go towards mixing vocals are very reflected in the what singers can do to change the tone of their voice. It's almost it's almost like it's emulating the whole process, but just digitally.
No, definitely. I mean, the vocal is everything. You know, you can't have like a preset idea of the parameters you're going to use in your head necessarily. You gotta just depend it all on the material you're working with.
Yeah, exactly. So take my voice for instance. What would you have to do differently in the mixing process when mixing, say, a vocal by myself compared to mixing a vocal from just a standard girl's voice? What would the difference in process be for you?
Right, so a little backstory, because I do know
we love a backstory.
The tone of your voice.
We love a backstory.
Well, it's not a story as much as I do know the tone of your voice, and I know you're very comfortable in falsetto and hitting a lot of the higher notes.
Yeah,
so
you know, I like it a bit.
Yeah. Well, it's good as a mixing engineer to work with a voice like that because it doesn't sit too low in the spectrum, so it doesn't mess with the bass as much. It's kind of that range where it just fits nicely.
Yeah.
As in it's easy to mix. I would say general kind of guidelines for your voice if you're singing, you know, that kind of range where you're mostly in falsetto, but you're definitely not like a bass baritone.
Yeah. Of course.
So I'd probably start to roll off. I mean, it really depends on the song, but in terms of the chain of processing I would start to roll off probably about 60 hertz ish. And then we might go a tiny bit higher, maybe up to 80, but
is that we're talking bass frequencies here, right?
Yeah, bass frequencies. So cutting that off, because obviously you'll get some stuff down there that you don't want, but for the most part you want to keep it sounding natural if that's what it's going for. I mean, especially if you're doing like an acoustic type piece.
It's interesting though when you say keep it sounding natural. Like, what is a natural sound? You know, it's
right.
Because it's so
well. I guess in like a really busy pop mix, sometimes they'll cut out a lot more low end because you don't need it as much if you got, you know, a lot going on in the bass when you've got synths and pads and kind of a funk bass going on. You don't want it to mess with the rhythm too much, so you can cut more of it, and it would sound unnatural if it was on its own, right?
Yeah, of course.
But because it's in a busy mix, you can kind of get away with it.
It's sort of, the process is all about giving space to the vocal to let it shine on its own terms in the track.
Yeah, and that's key, actually. I'm glad you mentioned that, because there's always a thing of cutting frequencies from instruments so that things fit better around each other. And as more of like a mixing engineer thing, I recommend doing that more dynamically. So like, cutting things, automating it basically.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's too complicated. What I want to touch on is when you're kind of cutting frequencies, you should always prioritize the vocal.
Right.
I mean, it does depend on the song, but generally the vocal is the lead instrument, and that should be clearly heard
in
through every word.
Contemporary music. Yeah, I mean the vocal.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I think it's really good to make sure you can hear every word. And so when you're cutting frequencies out, don't be afraid to prioritize the vocal and make sure, you can cut out some frequencies from the bass even, but you make sure that vocal is clear all the way through.
Yeah, because the thing is, if you've got a really good track in the works and it's let down by a vocal that is not really present, could be a lot clearer, could be better. It's just a real shame, because the vocal is the centerpiece of the track, and it needs to jump out at you. I mean, in today's listening tastes, we see, for example, with streaming taking a bigger role in determining the tastes of people, music. You see a lot more, the vocal come out a lot more, and also, for example, hooks come earlier in the song. So usually,
for sure.
Yeah, so usually, hooks are going to be more prominent in the mix than, say, a verse, maybe. It's
a patience thing as well. You want the hook to come early, and you want the hook to be kind of separated from the verse.
Yeah.
From an engineer's standpoint, often we'll use a different reverb on the chorus vocal than we would on the verse vocal.
That's interesting.
Well, one little tip is, and again, this is more of a mixing thing than a vocalist thing, but you can kind of widen it as soon as the chorus comes in after the verse. You can open up your reverb in two ways. Mostly, you can give yourself a bigger reverb for the chorus, and a brighter reverb, and that's what usually people do if they want to have this big expansive chorus.
Yeah.
But the other thing you can do that I really like to do is, when you're in your first verse and second verse, you can bring in the stereo width of the reverb. It's a really good way to kind of, you bring in the stereo width, and then when the chorus comes, it feels like it just opens up.
So when you say stereo width to a noob like myself, that's a very abstract term. So if you had to put it in terms of what it sounds like, what would you describe it as sounding like?
I guess a good way is to talk about it is like a double tracked thing. So without talking about, because I was kind of talking about the settings on the reverb, but actually a more basic way to do this would be to double track your chorus left and right as well.
Yeah.
And then don't do it in the verse, and that's another good way to separate it.
To give it some natural width. Yeah,
that's one thing I want to say for vocalists at home who they're not as big into the production side of things. Is don't just do harmonies, do a lot of doubles, because doubles are powerful, man.
Yeah.
As a producer, if you've got doubles to mix in, you can really you can use them so much to kind of highlight certain words. You just cut them in and out when you need them, but always give the mixing engineer more vocal takes, more good, solid, correct vocal takes than you think you need.
This is great material, man. Keep it coming.
Well, you don't need to use them, but if you need to, then you've got more vocal takes, and you don't want to be using the same vocal take as the lead and then duplicating it, because well, it's just not as natural,
Yeah, exactly. And you
want the timing and the pitch to be slightly more,
because it makes
slightly off.
It makes it feel a bit more authentic,
Yeah, and it sounds bigger, If you have three vocals, you got your left, center, and your right, all playing at the same time for the chorus. It sounds huge. It's like choral.
So there's something I notice about music from the late 2000s, in particular, early 2010s. It was
Oh
sort
yeah.
of when you know, Doors started to replace traditional production and recording techniques as like the
Oh
main,
yeah.
and you could tell that they hadn't really worked out how to get a natural sound or analog sort of
Pros and
sound
cons,
from
right?
that. And a lot of the pop music from that period is sort of, it just feels very flat, and it's the same with the vocal, you know, it doesn't really pop out at
Yeah.
you. It sounds very like machine like. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, no, I know exactly what you mean. I mean, there's a lot of really interesting things going on in the production side of things around that time because, of course, you got the massive switch from mixing on analog desks to doing it all within Doors, and Doors were, you know, at earlier stages back then. So they're trying to incorporate some of the onboard effects, like some of the reverbs and delays in the DAW versus their kind of more expensive outboard gear that, you know, probably sounded better, to be honest, at that time.
And
But they were trying to keep it modern and,
yeah,
you know, use all their new tools. And it was interesting because you get a lot more digital synths in that time too. So I think sound design was suddenly a lot more, although it was basic compared to what we have today. It was a lot more.
That's exactly what it sounds like. I think the you know, the patches that they
there were more
used
options
back then were, they
Yeah.
did sound just very like you could get them in GarageBand, you know. But this was a pop record, you know.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
no,
it's-
definitely.
and it goes into the vocals as well, in the sense that, you know, the way they were being processed, it did sound very very like basic. You know what I mean?
It's a nice nostalgic sound too.
I suppose, yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if it made a comeback. Like, you know, for example, you got like 80s revival, disco revival. We'll probably have
Yeah.
late 2000s average music revival at some point. You know what I mean?
And the other thing was, right, like a big change then was when you first went to Doors is you got so many more possibilities in terms of channels to send the vocal through, with like parallel channels, which means when you're sending the vocal to an effects processor and then bringing it back into the mix, like blending it in with the vocal. You know, usually you might just use a reverb and a delay. Well, now you can use, you know, 10 reverbs and 10 different delays.
Yeah,
and
the possibilities.
completely.
Endless, yeah.
Exactly, and it takes not that much effort really just to send it to an extra. You know, well, we'll send it to a little distortion bus on this chorus and start playing around with kind of stereo effects in new ways.
The thing is, you know, Doors, it's very, I see it very much like, if you can master a DAW, it's in practice mastering an instrument, because it is, if you use that as an instrument, you can achieve so many things that with normal instrumentation wouldn't be possible. You know,
it's the creative side of production,
isn't
it?
Exactly.
Yeah,
it just,
for sure.
It really spurs creativity, I think.
And you can really manipulate vocals more than, you know, you ever could.
Yeah. What would you say is the craziest way you've ever manipulated a vocal in any
I've done all sorts of vocals. I'd say like resampling gets pretty crazy. You know, if there's a when you start putting things through, there's a granulator effect in Ableton, in the DAW Ableton, and that gets mad.
Ableton's more for live sort of stuff, isn't it? It's more suited towards live performances, right?
Well, it is, but it's also more to do with like manipulation. You can go so far with manipulating audio in Ableton. It's amazing. And I don't use Ableton generally as my main DAW, but for audio manipulation, you can just go crazy. It's like frequency modulation, and you can literally make audio unrecognizable.
So it'd be really good for sort of like offbeat electronic kind of.
Yeah, and if you're doing like IDM or anything really trippy and
so
glitchy,
like Aphex Twin kind of vibes.
Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But there's also there's an effect by Sound Toys called Crystallizer.
Oh, right. What does that do?
And essentially, it's like a load of reverbs, and they're kind of pitch modulated,
Right.
and so you can create these massive kind of glacial sounds of this massive kind of delay reverby sound, and in the end, it sounds nothing like a vocal. But the point is,
but it sounds epic. That's the point.
Exactly. You're creating like pads from vocal performances, and so you can double that under the main vocal, and I've done that lots of times. You know, if you want a vocal to have this massive ambient space around it, you know, duplicate that lead vocal. Even better if you have a double part for it.
Exactly.
And then you use that as your basis to mess with it on the effects.
It's just so great that the vocal mixing techniques can be applied to any genre, and there's different standards for every genre. You know, like for example, with pop, there's a certain standard that's expected. With R&B, it's different. With hip hop, it's different. With, you know, with for example, with rock, like hard rock, it's different. I find that really interesting how they're processed in different ways depending on the style, in the sense that it is very, very subjective, and it's an art, you know.
And the first thing you can do to achieve that is, of course, everyone says get it right at the source. It's cheesy, but it's true. You know, when you're really trying to get your vocal sound right, even if you've got two microphones, you might even just have one microphone, but say you got two, you got a dynamic and condenser that's about as,
so what
basic two options as you can get. You know, if you're doing a rap vocal, like, I don't know, people will often assume the condenser is the obvious choice for any studio vocal just because it's, more detailed, and it's like, well, sometimes you don't want that detail. You want the aggression and the live sound, like a lot of rap vocals.
And also, if you go
dynamic mics,
if you're going into more noise stuff, like noise music, that's the, that is exactly what you want, isn't it?
It just really depends. But for a lot of rap vocals, I mean, the best kind of aggressive, punchy, live vocal sound you can get comes from something like an SM7B by Shure. Dynamic microphones that are kind of a bit larger, but they don't get all that detail and the high fidelity and the sibilance and stuff. You don't need that as much for rap.
But in this case, that's a positive, because
exactly. I mean, sibilance is more of an issue in rap, if anything, because it's so aggressive and right up to the mic, and people get intimate with it.
Yeah, of course. Oh yeah, speaking of getting right to the mic, what do you think, for example, if say I was in a session with you, okay, so you were my mixing engineer, I was the vocalist, and I was recording a vocal, what advice would you give me to get the best vocal with, say if we had just a standard condenser, what advice would you give me in terms of my mic technique to get the best?
Am I in the room or am I remote?
Let's say you're in the room.
Okay, if I'm in the room, it's a lot easier, because I would try and give you the minimum possible amount of guidance, because that really messes with your head. If you're an artist and you're trying to think of, I mean, you got the song to worry about. If you're trying to think of cues like turn your head to the side every time you sing every time you belt and stuff like that, you don't want that.
Yeah, it can get a bit distracting. I agree.
And I've done that, and it's such a and this could go on for ages, so I won't go too in depth about it, but it really is an art, treating artists right to get the sound that you want. I've been in the studio with artists of session vocalists, born and bred practically. It's in them to kind of be very critical, and they can be very surgical about it without it affecting what they're singing. And then some people are completely psychological and feeling emotional based, and you really need to be very kind of
present,
supportive, and a lot less critical. You wouldn't want to give them a cue about, oh, try this word a little bit differently.
Yeah,
you're better just to say, oh, it sounds amazing, and turn it up, and it's all about getting the vibe right.
I completely understand that, because you want the vocalist to be in the most comfortable space possible.
Exactly. So going back to you, if I was your mixing engineer and I was in the room, the first thing I'd do is try and clock first how well you know the song, because that affects how kind of, I guess, how critical I am of the exact phrasing and stuff like that. Whether I have you do longer phrases or shorter phrases, and do more comping. But I'm trying to really get a sense of you and how you kind of perform in the studio.
And I guess that comes with time. Doing more sessions with a certain vocalist, you'll start to develop a rapport, like a relationship.
Definitely,
where you understand each other's strengths and weaknesses, and you can amplify those strengths and sort of hide. And
people tense up in the studio, and I know because I do to some extent.
I know too.
When I'm singing in a studio, I tense up because everything is suddenly under a microscope. If you're singing with headphones on, I mean, that's weird for a start.
Yeah, for sure. That was like the main thing when I came to ACM. I found that so alien in the sense, because and there's
some people like to have one ear off, and that helps, and then some people then the backing track isn't quite as clear to them, so they don't like that.
Yeah, I usually have one ear off, but the main reason the headphone's so weird when you're singing is because people who are singers will know that when you're singing, it's based a lot on what you feel as well as what you hear, because what you're hearing isn't actually what is coming out, because basically you are hearing a combination of the vocal coming out of your mouth, and you're also hearing it come from your vocal cords going through your body up in through your skull and through through the bones in your skull, going straight. You know, you're hearing the vibrations too. You're hearing them as a sound, and as a result, your voice always sounds lower to you than it does to anyone else.
Yes, I definitely agree with that. I can feel that, and it sounds generally better when you've got no headphones on. You can hear the room feeding back to you, and you can very clearly hear what you're doing.
Then when you have one ear off, you're hearing both. You're hearing both the real vocal, what it actually sounds like, and you're hearing what you're used to hearing, which you've developed a feel for. Whereas if you have both headphones on, you're not getting that feel as much, and so it can feel a bit alien to some vocalists, I think, and it can be a bit of you know, it has to be learned. It's a skill that has to be learned, singing in the studio. Yeah, definitely.
Oh, definitely. But that goes on to the next point, which is headphone mix and how important that is.
Yeah.
And I don't mean from a generic point of just getting the volume right so it's not hurting, obviously, right? You're singing with a click, it can be alien, but you got to get the volume right, and you got to make sure it's not bleeding into the mic too much.
Of course, yeah.
But a big thing for vocalists is the reverb. You need to get the reverb right.
I love a bit
for
of
yourself. But it's also it's the type of reverb, it's the amount of reverb, because you can hear yourself feeding back. It's like singing into a wall. It's so easy to do because you can hear yourself feeding back live, and you can hear your response and how it affects the reverb.
Also, I think some vocalists can fall in love with reverb a bit too much. Some of the vocals I've heard. Or some of the tracks I've heard, you know, from ACM students and stuff,
and they can't hear themselves.
Yeah,
they just
I mean, it's not all of them by any means. It's only a few I'm talking about, but you know, the vocals are just completely drenched in reverb.
It's romantic, isn't it?
Yeah, and I can understand why vocalists fall in love with it, because when I first found out about it, I fell in love with it as well. You know, I agree
completely. But what I find is what people don't always expect works better is a stereo delay, or if you've got one headphone on, a mono delay.
Yeah.
Because you still get that response of hearing yourself back almost as if you're in a real room, but it's not quite as crowded in the mix, so you can hear your vocal drier a little bit better as well.
Of course.
So if you turn down the reverb more than you think sometimes, and then you add a slapback or some sort of stereo delay.
Yeah,
it just feels a little bit nicer, a little bit more spacious sometimes.
So again,
and I personally like to sing with that.
Again, beginner hat on here. What is the difference between a slapback and a stereo delay? What's the process?
Right. So a slapback is just like a really short delay. So I actually love the sound of a slapback because it reminds me of when you sing in like an auditorium or something, and you hear this. It's just got a live sound to it as you're singing. There's like maybe 100, 200 maximum milliseconds behind you.
Yeah.
A duplicate of your voice. And it has this live sound, but it just gives it a more natural feel to, it thickens up your vocal a little bit too. But then a stereo delay is, as opposed to a slapback, is you got more of a delay and it's more rhythmic. So a slapback, as long as it's very tight behind your vocal, it sounds quite natural. But a stereo delay is unnatural because it's like, it's like a 16th note or an 8th note delay. So you feel the tempo a lot more. And that works for some pieces where the tempo is more difficult to hear. If it's an acoustic thing and you don't want to click. Although, no, to be fair, you kind of still need a click because obviously it's almost like a click in itself where it would keep you on beat. But sometimes, anyway, a click, because it's so unnatural, if you pair that with a stereo delay, it feels more natural and you can feel the rhythm a little bit better.
Yeah, I think with a lot of vocal,
that's always nice.
With a lot of vocal processing in pop, the aim isn't necessarily to sound natural. It's to sound pop. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And the pop
definitely
sound is very
clear and
today. It's you know
right.
very synonymous in most chart music. You know, you get that kind of vocal that you hear is
Mm,
just it's kind of a standard. And
yeah,
I guess you know taste will change in a few years or so, and we'll have a a different kind of processing on the pop vocals, but
yeah,
with with
possibly.
with with the slapback, like you say, it's more natural, it's more live
Yeah,
suited.
but those would be the three things
Thing.
I would say to try as a vocalist when you're monitoring your reverb. That's pretty standard,
Yeah,
but try a slapback delay, try a stereo delay.
right.
Um, I find the stereo delay is underused, and it's really nice. I like it anyway.
And do you need to pan these delays at all, or?
Um, yeah, sorry, no, I should say because I'm saying stereo delay because I'm assuming two headphones because that's what I
Ah, right,
personally
yeah,
do.
yeah, of course, yeah.
If you've just got one headphone on, don't bother, just use a mono delay, and yeah, you'll just feel the rhythm a little bit better, and it's more spacious than a reverb, as I say, so you should hear yourself dry a little bit more. Um, but yeah, just and maybe don't do a slapback and a delay if you've got just one headphone on because again it might be a bit crowded. If you've got one headphone on, things do tend to get a bit more,
Yeah,
mushed
of
up and a
course.
little bit less clear anyway. So making sure you have a good headphone mix is really essential,
Mm,
more than ever
for
for
sure.
you know
I'm definitely gonna
single
I'm
headphone
definitely gonna
users.
use all these tips when the SSL studio reopens, man.
Oh, absolutely, you should.
Hopefully I can get an early booking for that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But
But,
no, the delay thing is massive. I personally think that helps so many singers.
right.
And the other thing is, instead of using a metronome, if your song doesn't have drums and you don't want to use a click, um, you could try just adding the Logic drummer, some sort of automatic drummer, and that's a little bit more natural. And I know it's pop isn't supposed to sound natural, but you
Mm.
can sing better if it sounds natural at
Yeah,
the time of your
yeah.
recording.
It doesn't mean sound wise. Yeah, I agree. But like there's still fundamental aspects of music like rhythm.
Yeah,
That you have to. It is just based out of nature, isn't it?
and
The
it's more
rhythm and
natural to hear a
melody.
drum kit than a click a lot of the time.
Of
So
course, yeah.
I find for some singers the click is really off-putting, and
Oh
a
yeah,
drummer,
I find
no
I
matter how
find it quite
fake and
off-putting.
MIDI the drummer sounds,
Mm.
it works so much better than a click for some people.
Yeah, I definitely find the click quite off-putting because it's just
Yeah,
like you said, it's an unnatural sound that isn't musical in any way. It doesn't make you feel the
yeah.
music more. It makes you feel the music less. But
Oh,
I
definitely,
understand
yeah,
why they're necessary. I feel like it's a necessary evil in the sense that it does the job,
yeah.
but you have to kind of get used to it. It's definitely a
And you can make
process.
your click better as well. Like if it like often what I'll do is I'll pitch the click. So in Logic you can choose the tone of the metronome, the actual pitch of it, and so I'll put it to the key of the song,
Yeah.
and then maybe for the
Oh
eighth
right,
notes I'll have
okay.
it to the fifth.
Well, that kind of works
And
then, I guess. But
yeah, and it's good if something's a little bit more. The instrumental track is more kind of ambient and a little bit less clear musically.
mm,
It's sometimes nice to have a pitched click and all the way up in tonality. I really recommend that, by the way.
right, okay.
Always max out tonality on your click because it bleeds less into the mic, and you'll just be able to hear it better through the music. If it's just a hit, just a transient, it sometimes gets a bit lost.
Yeah, I find the pitching of the click to the key signature really interesting because I've found that in the past there was a way that I used to use to determine the key of a song that I was listening to, and
Yeah,
it was it's not I haven't invented it. I found it on YouTube or whatever, but basically it involves listening to the song for a few seconds and then
hmm
hearing what the first note you hum is, which usually turns out first note you hum that kind of works with the rest of the song. Do you know what I
yes,
mean? So if you have a pitch click that is the key signature,
makes it easier
that makes it a lot easier, and it kind of
for
allows
sure.
you to get into the song more and maybe be a bit more expressive in the sense of some improvisation. If the song requires improvisation, I think that can kind of keep you centered around
Definitely, yeah.
around the key that it's in
And it's a
instead of.
subtle thing, right? It's a subconscious thing almost.
Yeah,
You
of
know,
course. Yeah, absolutely. Because when we're improvising, we're not thinking solely about what key are we in. We're thinking about the notes that we're singing and the next
yeah,
notes that we're going to be singing. So if it's subconscious, then, like you said, we're not thinking about it, and it's a sort of an automatic process. We don't need to think about, oh, is this in F, or I need to make sure that I hit this note, because that's not how it works, you know.
And have you ever tried to sing with someone playing a note that's not in the key, like right beside you? It's impossible.
It's really difficult because they clash. Especially for me, I've always found that if someone, for example, if two songs are playing at the same time, I can't enjoy either of them because they just clash so much, and
completely
it takes away everything.
It's a weird thing that music can't be played at the same time, you know.
Yeah.
It's really off-putting.
I mean, it can be, you know, in certain experimental genres, I guess, but
I guess, yeah, like experimental, but
you know, I feel like that requires very
and it's
trained ears to enjoy that, you know.
Yeah, if you've got like absolute perfect pitch, maybe you know, maybe it won't off-put you quite as much.
Like,
but
Charlie Puth or something, you know.
Yeah, exactly. But I find if you just keep that click in the key, you know, it does more good than bad.
Well, I think we've come to the end of this podcast, unfortunately, because as the name dictates, it is 30 minutes. It's been
is that in the name?
It's been an absolute pleasure, Ben. I've learned a lot. Hopefully you've learned a bit too about vocals.
Absolutely. I'm glad I could be of help as well.
Yeah. It's been great. You know, I've enjoyed talking about how male vocals are mixed differently, and you know how a lot of people don't realise, how a lot of mixing engineers don't appreciate the differences between the male and female vocals and their you know, properties and stuff. And
it's just all about staying comfortable in the studio.
Yeah, exactly. Comfortable is best. That's what we'll leave it on, I guess. All right, thanks.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, no problem, man. It's been an absolute pleasure. I appreciate it. Thanks for everyone for tuning in, obviously, and we will see you next time. Bye bye.
Peace out.